Yo, 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 this is Steve back with another episode of the Stuck in Augmented Reality podcast. With this podcast, it's very, very interesting because I got an opportunity to chat with one of the people that really inspired me to do the Portland Experiment project. If you guys are unfamiliar with that, I essentially, over the summertime last week, I ended up making a augmented reality experience that took a bust of George Floyd that I found on Sketchfab and creating an AR experience and going around Portland and doing little mini digital installations. And it allowed me to make a course and express how AR, augmented reality, could be used for really the beauties of activism. It was a way to mitigate factors, and one of the influential things about that was because I had the model and because I knew my way around the software and the tools. All I had to do was just create the experience from the idea. I didn't have to model. I didn't have to do any of the coding or any of that stuff. It was really like kit bashing, and so one of the people that made that all possible was the person that had made the model, Dan Edwards and his son, who they really paved the way in many ways for, creating Black culture in 3D sculptures. I got to talk to him. I got to learn more about his process, got to learn a lot about the things that he's doing and how our work, both my work and his work, has intersected in many ways, both in practice and in ideology. And so it was a great conversation. Hopefully you all learned from it. This is something that I am doing to expand on the project that I created last year and actually do little memoirs of or highlights or profiles of the creators that are doing stuff with technology and the arts to further the conversations of equity and access for Black and brown people. And so it was a great conversation. Hopefully you enjoy it. And from there, we'll move on to it was really exciting to have this experience. And so, without further ado, let's get it started. Super excited to chat with you. It looks like you have, are those which sort of are those, like, which 3D printers are those back there?
Those are TiVo Tornadoes.
Okay.
They changed the name on there because I guess they were trying to rebrand. But it's based on the CR10.
Okay.
And they're like, you could get them for about $300.
Really?
And they're large. Yeah. So they print, like the CR10, they can print S5 or is it S5? I don't remember. It's CR. Anyway, it can print 12 by 12 by 16, which is pretty good for $300. You don't get
that is really nice.
You don't get any support from the company, technical support, but it's open source. There's a community to figure out anything.
Oh, dang. I need to look into that because I do a lot of stuff with the Multnomah County Library, and they have like a big maker space. And so they constantly get like Ultimakers, donated and a whole bunch of different 3D printers. But I used to have this like I got one off Kickstarter, this like M3D. It was like a $300 printer. And that thing like just sort of went on the fritz like at the beginning of COVID. And so then I was just like, dang, I can't go to the maker space. I can't play around with mine. I need to find something I need to find a solution. And so I'm definitely going to check that out because I can deal with no support.
Like, yeah, you seem like you could get around that pretty easily.
Yeah.
You're a very technical guy.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that one's pretty good. I would recommend if you could get two of them, that would be even better. Because, one breaks down, you can fix it and work with the other one. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually a good thing since it's so inexpensive, you know. But yeah, you know, just super excited to chat with you because I think I was looking back and like I did this sort of like end of the year sort of wrap up, and I was sort of like timing out like all the things that sort of happened last year. And it wasn't until I sort of like came across your work, like worked on this like AR project, and then from there it just sort of like went from like okay, trying to navigate COVID to just like okay, there's actually like this whole avenue that like sort of came from that just like moment in time for me. And so I was just like, dang, you know, like that was um you know, it was just really impactful. And then just the project that I ended up doing that just ended up impacting a lot of just started a lot of conversations. And so when it came down to sort of like revisiting that project, I was like, huh, you know, one thing that I want to do is like actually talk to the creator of, you know, like the model and everything, you know, and just sort of just like pick his brain because the thing like the quote that you put on Sketchfab about you know just the reasons why this type of work is powerful and you know just the having that intersect with the realities of you know actual monuments that pertain to black people and you know sort of all that stuff and then reckoning with the fact that like we still have Confederate statues and all those different things, it really resonated with me to a point where it was like, yeah, you know, like this is why, you know, stuff like AR and you know 3D models and technology can um, really have a big impact in many ways that people often just don't think about, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and so like one of the things I wanted to ask is just what essentially what set you down this path? Like what made you want to, you know, sort of do this type of work?
Well, I did a monument. I was a public sculptor back in most of the 90s, I guess you would say. And so I've done public sculpture. So, but I do agree that if it's not right for the time, it needs to be taken down. You know, just like buildings do. Architects don't have a hard time putting their building up in a new place um, where an old one used to stand. But the I did a monument to Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy back in 1995. And from that point, I started working closely with the King family, Isaac Ferris, at the King Center in Atlanta for another project that ended up in the Olympic Village in 1996.
Oh wow.
So that project was a series of portraits of Olympic gold medalists from we're going way back to 1920. He was still alive. He was 100 at the time. To, you know, people in the 80s, I guess, like Greg Louganis, for example. But half of that was meant to be African American pioneers in the Olympic movement. And I was fortunate enough to meet many people um, and spend time with them. And so from that series, I just kept moving in that direction. Next series was of Negro Leagues baseball players. And so what I would do with all these people, prominent people, noteworthy people, historic people, is I would travel to their home and sculpt them. And so then I moved into blues, sculpting blues performers that were still around. And they were harder to get in contact with. The gatekeepers, you know, the managers wouldn't allow for that. So I would just show up at their shows and sculpt the shows.
Hmm.
So really it's just been an area that I have kept a hand in since, you know, that monument with Martin Luther King. I don't know if that
Oh,
answers your question.
oh yeah, yeah. So, and so you mentioned like 1995, right? So like you weren't just like pulling up Blender and taking some
No,
photos and then
no.
and then just
This
like
is
using those as references.
no.
Like what was that sort of workflow like? Because I was born in 1990, and I remember when I first got like my computer, and I think it was like Wolfenstein was like, all the craze back then. And so it's like what was that sort of workflow like, that you started off with?
Yeah, I was late to computers. My dad got a computer before I did, and but he had a cell phone way back in the '90s too. I'm old school. I was trained old school. I was trained at the New York Academy of Art, and it was I was trained in the figure and portrait, and we used clay and wax and made molds, plaster molds, cast in bronze. It's old school, and really, a lot of people that I went to school with are still doing it that way. They haven't gone on to digital. I'm one of the only ones that I know of that went to digital, just as a tool, because the truth is, in the studio, when you're making plaster molds of large clay sculpture, it's pretty much back-breaking work, and it's very expensive. And so it's just hard to maintain. So I really didn't go digital till 10 years ago. And that was when Sculptress came out it was invented by a man named Thomas Pettersson from Sweden. And I was on it right when it came out. And that was a back saver, I guess you could say. Save money too, because 10 years ago times were pretty tough. So it was like the right answer for a bad economy.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I always think about when I got introduced to, because I predominantly make comic books, and so just all those original pages to get one book done is you'll just have stacks and stacks and stacks, and then you just trying to find a way to one preserve it, but then also like if you need to make if you have an error in it, you need to make a change. It's just time consuming, and it just takes up a lot of space. And so when I got to like a digital workflow, the luxury that I had was, do I want to have some original art? If I don't, I could just focus on the creation of the project, rather than that. Then you got to worry about like backing stuff up and stuff like that. But like it's nothing like having to have a warehouse for your work.
Exactly.
And it's because it's I think like what made it interesting with me seeing your work is that it has that sort of traditional aesthetic to it, that traditional feel to it, much that's very different than somebody that just works only in ZBrush, or somebody that works only in Maya or Blender,
Right.
and so when I actually like started putting these experiences together and putting them out, like it felt natural, because you have a 30-foot monument in the middle of the city center, and if it's lit well, it's like it's there, right? And I thought that was just a very unique sort of addition, or that like little detail that that was like, there's a lot to unpack here just with that experience. And for me, I admire it because I can't do that stuff. I can sort of stitch stuff together and create these experiences with these assets, but as somebody that like always wants to learn more and more about processes and stuff, it's just one of those where it's like, this ain't just some pixels. This is some like technique and approach.
Yeah.
And like it's just admiring, for me.
Thank you.
And so it's like, so typically, like, how, before you got into like the digital stuff, like how big were like your sculptures?
They didn't get as big as I would have liked for them to get. I'm only just now starting to move in that direction. But the largest one was probably, I did a horse. It's in bronze. It's in Louisville, Kentucky. It was at that time, the last Triple Crown winner, affirmed. And it was over life size. It was 125% scale. So I think it was like 7 foot tall, and then however long a horse is. But usually the stuff was life size, statuary type of stuff at the largest. So, but now being able to work things out digitally, I can transfer over the break. This this winter break, we enlarged something in foam, and we did it. It was very large scale from a small model, and we found a technique that works really well quickly. So I'm expecting through the next year to do some large scale works for our campus, the university campus, basically. So.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, it's a. I think that's one of the things that I truly appreciate about digital stuff is the ability to modify the scale after the fact,
Yeah,
right? And to where if you have enough detail in it, and essentially have a poly count that works, you can make something 2 inches or you can make something 200 feet.
yeah,
And because of the software it lends it to, you know, whether you could get that in the real world and 3D print that or, like do some sort of, printing or casting or however the technique is. I mean, that's where the, additional technology is required,
yeah, yeah,
but it's I guess one of the things that I also wanted to know was, when you're, because I know that you worked on the like the hip hop artists sort
yeah,
of variation where you did like Mac Miller, you did XXX Tentacion, you did a variety of different artists that have passed away. Like was it sort of along the lines like that approach? Was that sort of along the lines of the sort of mission that you were sort of taking on to sort of immortalize these you know uh, contemporary and pop culture figures of the time?
yeah. Those particular ones were posthumous. Yeah, they were sculpted after they passed away. And that project came on before we sculpted George Floyd. George Floyd was just an obvious outcome of the work we were doing with hip hop. And the hip hop series was just really an extension of the blues series I did a couple decades ago. And so what happened was, I'm sorry, I have a train coming by.
Hey,
I live
you'll hear the train coming by in mine too.
um, I did the blues series is just a second. It's just now really okay. The blues series is really kind of my favorite body of work. It's what I did, the best work that I'd ever really done, I felt. And my son and I were rediscovering we were working with photogrammetry a few years ago. And so what I was finding was I could take old photographs I did of my sculpture that may not have existed anymore, and I could feed it into the photogrammetry, and all of a sudden it brought it back to life. I could 3D print it from photographs I took before I worked digitally. They were photographs just to document the sculpture, So that was an amazing thing. And so my son was, I trained him to be a sculptor since he was 7. He's 21 now. He's better than me. Rodman, he actually sculpted the George Floyd bust. Okay. So, yeah. So anyway, he was interested in doing a series like that. And I said, well, I'd always meant to go into hip hop back in the 90s. But it just never happened, So I said, maybe we could try that now. And so we did it. We spent like a year and a half going out to at least one hip hop show a week. And we would just take our wax into the event, get as close to the stage as we could and sculpt whoever was on stage, opening acts as well as, headliners. And so that was a way to reconnect with the material rather than just sculpting digitally all the time. It was a way to get out there, reconnect with wax and work with real-time stuff. And we would get backstage and work on some more, and people were really interested in it, and so as we were doing that project, certain hip hop artists were making, headlines, passing away, unfortunately. And so we thought, well, let's document this as we go. We can only do it digitally, but we'll put it up there just as a way to, these were people we would have liked to have sculpted, at a show. So it's hard to keep up with because that kind of work takes a lot of time. So we've, there've been a few big names that have passed away since the last one we sculpted, but it's just hard to keep up with, really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just 2020 all in and of itself was
Yeah,
it was interesting, right? Like, and yeah. I really like how, because for me, it's like I still have like my Copics, I still have like my Copic markers, I still have like my paint pens, I still have like my brushes and everything, and so even though I work primarily digitally now, like I always look for that reason to have that like tactile experience, and more importantly, like I used to love doing, just like live paintings, right? I just used to love just going out there and doing conventions and demonstrations and like live work that people can sort of just come around and gather and tap in and just learn sort of the process. And
yeah,
me, it allows me to get out the studio and like be a part of stuff, but also be productive and an artist. And so I really appreciate that, like, just the intentions to just like actually be out there, you know
yeah,
and creating amongst creators, and just being a part of like the culture, because um with the beauty and curse of the internet is that like you can be everywhere, but you don't have to be anywhere.
yeah. Right. You
uh
don't have to leave.
yeah, and so I think it just shows like just it comes across, like the art comes across, as very authentic, because it is, like it is. And so like you mentioned that like you would actually like sculpt there, so like typically how long would it take for you to sculpt an artist like at a show, right? Because like a show is typically like maybe 3 hours.
Oh, well, yeah, 3 hours of nonsense. Like
Yeah.
you have like the pay to play kind of thing, the locals that would get up there and do their silly stuff. You have to sit through all that, for so when it came to the actual performers that were billed, uh, you might have you might have an hour, and then the headliner might only be up there for 20 minutes. So you really don't necessarily have a lot of time to work. Um, but there were a lot of shows that where we did have more time. And what happens is um, you show it to the right person sees you working on it. They ask you to come backstage, and you can kind of keep working on it that way, up close and personal. And also, you go to multiple shows. So you may have to kind of follow somebody around for the all the few shows that they do that are in the area. And then that through that amount of time, you come up with something that kind of works. And back in the day, sculpting a blues performer's on stage for a long time and doesn't move, right? There's not a lot of action, especially those guys were old, so they're not they're not dancing at all. So it's a little bit easier to kind of get some focus on the face. Um, and so I was able to pack in more time on a portrait back then, but it still only added up to about 5 hours. So right now, our typical portrait of a hip hop performer, we'd be lucky if we had an hour into it. And so what you do is you learn how to be very efficient and make the right observations. And so going with my son, we push each other. So you glance over at the other person's work and be like, oh man, he's nailing it. I better bring it. It's really, and you're in the dark. There's a lot against you, but that's really the fun of it all. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, there's not a lot of time into it, but the prep time, driving there, driving back, doing the research, that takes up a lot of more time than the actual sculpture.
Yeah, yeah, and so I started mentoring and working with Portland Community College to start getting more kids into like 3D stuff for art, whether it's like sculpting in Blender or learning how to like make AR stuff for comic books and stuff like that. And a lot of the stuff that I'm doing a lot of the stuff that I'm focusing on is really sort of like that prep work,
Yeah.
where I find myself working on a project. I'm writing stuff. I'm sort of putting down notes, stitching together links and maybe make a mood board or something before I even like go to take on the project. Because
Yeah.
like I want to be able to just like forget everything and just like go to work when it's ready.
Yeah. Right.
And and I didn't realize like how much time and effort I was putting into the prep until I was actually like building out little like modules for them. And so it's good to hear that like, like, it would take typically more time to just prep for it than it would to actually work on it.
Yeah.
Because I think that really rings true for somebody that, um, you know, takes the practice of art seriously.
Yeah. I was working on a project for Portland Community College. Did you see that any of that work?
Uh, did you talk to Dan?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So Dan is the one that hired me
Okay.
for that project. I guess technically we are sort of connected on a project already.
Okay. Yeah. I think it didn't work for them. I never heard back from them together. But I was able to make it. I was able to make it work for me. But I think for the layman, which was what it was supposed to be designed for, that project, I'm not sure that it worked for them. I never heard back again from them, but I know there was a lot of excitement for it. And I understood they didn't have to get back to me because I understood that it's kind of difficult. That stuff is kind of difficult to teach to, I think, kids, 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or something like that.
Yeah, it's like 10 to like 17, and we're looking at like AR, VR, just immersive technology in general, or just like technology,
Yeah.
right? And so it's when I got on it, I told them it was ambitious. Like I was like, this is a
Yeah.
very ambitious thing,
Right.
but based off of just what the mission is, just to get that exposure, get them access to tools and a lot of that stuff. It really spoke to like the work that I was doing, towards the middle of summertime
Yeah.
and the end of summer, to where I was like, oh, this is something that I'm making YouTube videos of the same stuff already,
Yeah.
like, and so I was just like, yeah, this sounds like a no-brainer to me, you know. And so yeah. Well, at that point, I mean, hey, I'll probably circle back with you on a couple of things too, because you know, uh, it's I've sort of taken on that undertaking to, hopefully push the program forward and kind of go from there. But okay, world gets smaller. World gets smaller.
Yeah, Sculptress was the one. I think that was their sticking point, because it's an old software. It's not developed anymore. It's hard to get a good version of it anymore. But Sculpt GL, and I was thinking of what was free, accessible for students, intuitive for the most part. And Sculpt GL, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a browser-based app,
Okay.
and it's pretty easy. And you can do all the same stuff in that. For the most part, you can do the same stuff in that. So
How does yeah, I'll definitely have to check that one out, because I know some browser-based stuff, which is, well, I know like Scratch, which is like a game, sort of MIT game development browser-based solution. That's available. There's like an animation program called Piscale, like a 2D pixel art animation one. That's browser-based. But I didn't know that there were any like 3D ones that were browser-based.
yeah, that's, as far as I know, that's the main one. So, but
Interesting.
yeah, that's probably where I would go. The only problem is I can't find a way to do mirror. So if, like, you're sculpting a head and you wanted to import an eyeball, there's no way to really mirror to put the other eyeball on there, for example. I don't
Okay.
sculpt that way, but a lot of people do. It's a fundamental way to develop things. And so,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, hey, tools, there are a lot of them available and
Yeah,
stuff.
there are. Yeah.
Have you ever played with Blender?
I'm working on it now. I'm learning it right now. I started it 10 years ago. It was too big, it's better now. It's much better now, but it's still bulky. And what the difference between Sculptress and Blender, or even Sculpt GL and Blender, is Sculptress is designed for basically a traditionally skilled artist who has limited computer skills.
Yeah.
Blender is for anybody that knows how to do hotkeys for everything, who loves to do keyboard stuff. And so it's loaded with a lot of options. And I think also Blender and ZBrush know that their audience is generally not traditionally skilled artists. And so they try to find ways for anybody to get anywhere. Whereas a traditionally skilled artist might have a few simple tools and could hack that system and get what they need from it. And so that's where I am. So I'm more interested in a stripped down kind of interface, I guess. So Blender, you have to weed through a lot of the stuff that they have to find what it is that you actually need. And that's where I am with it. So it's got it all. It's great. It's just you gotta learn to get what you need from it.
Yeah. It's I just got introduced to I think grease pencil, and I was like, oh, that looks really interesting, like drawing 2D stuff in 3D space.
Well, I just did that yesterday. I just hooked up because the inventor of Sculptress had been telling me that I need to use a stylus for years.
Yes.
I was like, oh, the mouse works fine. It's a big, broad,
man.
You can hold it.
This changes the game.
Well, for me, I'm not sure it's a game changer, but the idea that you just said about drawing two-dimensionally on a 3D space, that was precisely why I hooked it up just yesterday, and I like it. I'm gonna be able to teach online with it more efficiently. So
yeah, like it's I think because I'm, like I sort of missed I guess I was too early for like the iPad sort of movement that's going on right now.
Yeah.
Where there's a lot of people using Apple Pencil and the iPad. When I tried to do it, there just weren't a lot of good solutions or pins for like the iPad. So I sort of fizzled away from that and moved to more like desktops and just like a Wacom Cintiq. And so I ended up playing around with that. But, just the ability to like play around with ZBrush or, do some like animation in 2D, and then just really sort of the workflow is very similar across the different software. It's just, different hotkeys and slightly different approaches.
Yeah.
I feel like it's made me a lot more efficient. And it like reminds me of like when I went from like marker ink based like work to like watercolor, where I was like, I need to figure out how this whole water thing works, because like I'm trying to do the same stuff and it ain't working.
Yeah.
I truly appreciate like just being able to create in this day and age where we have the ability to like do all these different tools, pretty relatively easily, once you figure out one of them.
Yeah. Sketchfab is nice.
Yes.
I was messing around with Sketchfab for a few years, but I finally, over the last year, I think it was with the George Floyd bust, really was the first thing I uploaded to it, I think. And it's got a lot of great stuff on there where you can make your 3D model, you could modify it, the surface, material, whatever way you want. I mean, it's amazing. And the AR is great, but you could also, I don't know if you've taken screenshots from Sketch.
Yeah, that right there, like, yeah. That's what I used to do for, I think I did it when I did the course where I made like the icon, and I just like used the Sketchfab, like orientation tools, and I just did a screenshot from there. I was like, oh, this is golden right here.
Yeah. You could take a high-res screenshot. Is that what you did? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, it's better than ZBrush, in my opinion. The process for taking a high-res screenshot in Sketchfab is better than ZBrush. But
Man, I am still trying to figure out ZBrush because that mess.
yeah,
Just
I agree.
it's interesting. It's growing on me. I would say it's growing on me because of like how well it works with like a pen.
Yeah,
But like
sure.
it's definitely growing on me. It's sort of the outlier, in my suite of programs that I'm using.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's easier to deal with than Blender, but
yeah.
I've also the ZBrush that I have is like 6 years old now. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's a grandpappy right there.
yeah, yes, I know what they've added to it since, but I don't. Have you checked out their ZBrush Mini? You probably have no reason to check out their free. Their
Nah, I haven't. It's yeah. I was just like, let me just get started with ZBrush and let me just get whatever
yeah,
and whatever everybody's using already, and then use that. And so yeah, I've been just sort of basic, like mind you, surface level, right? Like I've only used ZBrush for like maybe like a couple of months, 3, 4 months,
yeah.
and so I'm fresh on it. Unity, on the other hand, that's a different story, um, but I'm just dabbling on seeing what's possible. Really, like it's been a very interesting year. Like I'm sort of like I'm a little over a year into this whole scene, and so I feel like there's just a lot that I need to learn or can learn, and I'm just sort of just not stressing out on trying to get it done in a timely manner.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's I guess one thing is like, so I see that like since I initially went on to like your Sketchfab, I noticed that you started to add more and more models on
Yeah.
to it, and so is sort of Sketchfab going to be just sort of the database that you're, or like the portfolio that you'll have for this particular series, or like
As far as I can tell, I've looked to see what other 3D viewers that are out there for portfolio, and I, I don't know that any of them compete with Sketchfab. I could be wrong about that. And Sketchfab's technical support has been pretty great. I've got a few issues with it. I don't like that. I like the way YouTube has it so you don't have to have comments on your video if you don't want.
yeah,
I wish Sketchfab was the same way, because on Sketchfab, you can't police it. You can only report it if somebody writes something negative, and they take care of it. But forget about that. Say it's a portfolio. I want to show professionally my work to somebody. I don't want all these weird comments below the work to be
yeah,
visible. I just want to be professional. And so most of my work is in private. So those works are supposed to be accessible to the public, and you do get some weird comments. But Sketchfab tries, they do keep a look out for me on that work, and they respond all the time immediately to any question I have. I like them. Um, so yeah, that's the place where I'll probably keep posting, and we do it when we can.
yeah.
Those works take us. It could be a couple days, it could be a week to make a portrait like that, and it's intense. It's not just like a couple hours a day. It's like the whole day, like the whole day. So yeah, it's pretty intense work, and so it's hard to kind of other things pile up as you're trying to finish out a portrait like that. And so um, when we find time to add one or two, we do. And obviously there's no shortage of people worthy of memorializing. So
Yeah. That's one of the things that sort of encouraged me to uh, improve on the initial like AR experience that I did. Uh, was initially started off with that George Floyd bus and just being able to go out into the world and sort of be able to create these huge monuments to these figures without having to worry about the repercussions of doing that, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't have to get a permit, you don't have to, like get all the materials, you don't have to worry about somebody vandalizing it.
Yep.
And but you're still, we all pretty much like operate based off of just like videos and pictures at this point, right?
Yeah.
Especially
It
during
looks real.
quarantine,
Yeah.
and so being able to just like make a picture and put it and have that sort of like physical experience of going out to those different locations, but then have that discretion through technology. I just, that experience of just being able to create that and then experience it firsthand, and then having the luxury and opportunity to sort of share that and share the process. Like for me during that time, it was liberating, right? Like, and so then I was just like, okay, what if the catalog was just expanded, and what if you're able to do that with, a variety of different figures within a particular context. And then I ended up, going back onto your Sketchfab or just typing in stuff and then coming back to your Sketchfab. It was like, oh snap! Like like there's some sort of synergy going on because you know, like
Yeah.
it was there, right? Like it was there, and so like one of the things that I was really I've appreciated with the internet is just the having the ability to sort of share work across either cultures or across geography. And for creators, I felt like it's very liberating to sort of just have it be open to the world, in many ways, where it's a lot of the pieces that I do, whether it's web comics or YouTube videos and stuff like that, I created just to sort of be a part of the culture in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And so seeing sort of like these high quality models that are so like pertinent to history and culture, like what was the reason for it to just be widely available to download?
That was not my idea. It wasn't that it wasn't, I just hadn't occurred to me. A friend of mine, Daniel Rolnick, who's friends with Dan that you're working with at PCC.
Oh, okay.
He was the one who came to me. He goes, "Are you doing something for George Floyd?" And I was like, "Well, we've been thinking about it." But he goes, "How about you do a model and make it a free download for the general public?" And I was like, "Yeah." I mean, I knew that I could do that with Sketchfab. Actually, I had posted models on Sketchfab before the George Floyd bust, but only shortly before that. So he came to me at the right time where I was able to say, yeah, I think I know how to get that together. And so I was like, I do like that idea. And because, the difference between sculpting George Floyd and say sculpting John Lewis, I sculpted the John Lewis bust 9 years ago. And so he was a living congressman at that time. And we put up sculpture and statues of congressmen, So for me, that's a paid gig, potentially, and it's not exploitation or anything like that. That's just what happens. You get hired, a sculptor gets hired to do a statue like that, goes in a state house or wherever it goes. But a bust of George Floyd, that belongs to the people. And so that made perfect sense. I was like, yeah, that's how you do a sculpture of George Floyd, is make it accessible to people to take it into their communities. And so it immediately made sense to me. And so and Sketchfab being such a great platform to do that, it was just like, well, now I can do this kind of thing, and so that it just made sense. It was like you said, timing, everything was timing, everything came together. And of course, it was such an outrageous thing. I don't even want to go into that. But I think it's important for people to, at that time, to, if you had something that you could add to help people move through this then do it, you know? And so that was like a no brainer. And, boy, it was a really weird year, right? I mean, all the way around. 2020 was just a really weird year. I enjoyed the work that I did. I enjoyed the challenges of it. I enjoyed seeing people get passionate and start this movement. I enjoyed all that. So I didn't feel like it was a bad year. From a personal standpoint, you know, there was a lot of encouragement. There was a lot of encouraging things that happened through that year.
Like that's one thing that I sort of joke around about. It's that prior to 2020, prior to all this, like I was working as like a personal trainer. I was trying to break into the art scene, or like the, you know, sort of like that art design ad agency scene. You know, I was just sort of just trying to find my footing. And it took the pandemic, and it took, you know, all these different things. You know, mind you, I've been an animator and like a comic book illustrator, and I've always focused around sort of storytelling around Black issues. And like in 2019 and the beginning of 2020, I was always trying to figure out like, how do I make like Black issues palatable so that I could actually like build on that, you know? And then 2020 hit, and then it was just like, well, I'm glad that I didn't really explore that idea too much, because the work that I'm doing now just in and of itself is just so much more relevant now. And and I think, I mean, to that point, it's sort of, you know, instead of making it more palatable, I've sort of gone the opposite and just tried to make it more authentic. And it was just a very like enlightening year for in many ways, you know. Like 2020 was like the year of like reflection in like many areas of life, right? It's like you sort of purge the things that like aren't essential, and then you build on the things that are sort of, you know, essential in your life. Whether it's food or processes or toilet paper, or like a whole bunch of different things, right? Like, and so, you know, it's just been really interesting. You know, I'm fortunate to like make it on the other side of 2020, you know, but from there, it's a matter of just like, what did you learn from it? You know, like what insights did you get from that experience moving forward as a creator, an adult, you know, an American? And it's you know, it's always, I think as a creator, it's really, really, it feels really good to be able to see other people's work of that time, and how much it often parallels, you know, the work that you do, you know, because then it's like, okay, you know, like there's this sort of unspoken sort of synergy that like, you know, we all sort of have, that we're able to communicate in these really indirect ways because of the art, you know, because of the medium and stuff. You know, it's just really, for me at least, it's been really, really encouraging to be able to like, you know, see everybody just sort of take on this challenge in their own way, shape, and form, and just put it out there in the world, you know?
Like, it's still rough. The political landscape is still a bit rough, but not as rough as I thought it was going to be at this point. After that insurrection, I thought that there was going to be a lot more of that sort of thing. So maybe there's a little bit of a light that's going to come to us a little sooner than I thought. But yeah, have you had a vaccine yet?
No, not yet. I'm applying. I'm in the middle of like trying to get into medical school right now. So I literally had like a medical school interview from the University of Chicago. So like, you know, like I'm sort of right there, but not yet there. Right. And so my girlfriend, she works in the emergency department. And so she just got her second vaccine, I want to say last week. And so the running joke now is that I'm the plague in the household because, you know, she's vaccinated. She's sort of like working in a hospital. She's doing her thing. And then I'm just sort of at home trying to get into medical school, but not vaccinated. And, you know, it's a.
Yeah, but you're the safest one. If you're staying at home, you're safe because you can still have the vaccine, still give it to somebody, right?
Yes, yeah, like you're still it's still a thing, but
Yeah.
when she comes home and I come home, it's like I better not cough on her or nothing.
Yeah. Well, University of Chicago, that's a really good school. Good luck. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
great.
They apparently. So, are you familiar with sort of like the medical school landscape stuff?
Not really. Not really.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really
Yeah.
interesting. I think, especially like just sort of the insights that people have gotten about healthcare in general from last year.
Yeah.
Just the shortage of physicians. It's like, why is there a shortage?
Well, that's a good
Like,
point.
you know, underrepresentation, how it's affecting minority communities, how COVID is and all this stuff. And it's, going through the process. I like all those things that sort of happen, just going through the process, you can see why all that stuff is perpetuated,
Sure.
right? Like I think this is my third time applying, and um, so far, I've spent about $11,000 just in the application process.
Wow.
Not including having to take the MCAT and having to do all these different things, right? And so, just to even be considered, you got to go up this like huge hurdle that like we don't even have. It's like we don't even have the same standard for the military or for police officers,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so it's just those inequities are just perpetuated by just how many hoops and ladders people have to go through. So hopefully I'll be on the other side of it.
Yeah. I wish you luck. I'm sure you will be. I'm sure you'll do fine. But that's discouraging that they make it so difficult.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the thing is like that should be making big headlines right now. Maybe they're going to wait, but that's something that should obviously be looked at and fixed. And if the press, the media doesn't put pressure on that, it'll just be more of the same.
yeah, yeah. I'm just really curious to see how the post-COVID landscape looks.
Yeah.
you know, because it's I think with sort of virtual interviews and like all these things we could do virtually, then I think it can help break down some of those barriers and lower some of those costs. Because it's like I didn't need to fly to Chicago to do an interview, right? Like flying to Chicago from Portland, that whole experience for what, one day is like that's a good $600-700 right there, just for the trip, right? And so, that's one thing I didn't have to pay for. I like it. Yeah, but yeah, definitely appreciate the time. I guess. Oh, what? So one thing I'm curious, right? Because so how old are you?
Yeah, I'm old. 55.
Okay, so you sort of, you've lived through sort of like the the post segregation, uh, like the whole like busing era, like you lived through, sort of like what used to be like the civil rights moment of the decade,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so like how would you compare like this experience now, the 2020 civil rights era of era of the century, to like that sort of time, and like as a creator as well?
Right. Well, this is the first time I've seen anything like this up up close. When I was a kid, like in 1968, let's say, I would have been 3 years old. And so that might have been a time when a lot of that was happening. Um, so I don't remember anything like that in the small town I grew up in. But um, when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, I remember not wanting to go to Alabama, deathly afraid to go to Alabama. And I had to figure out what was that all about. And I think the church bombing was something
Yes.
that was just like still in the air. People were still kind of remembering that. 10, 12 years later at that time, And so I guess what I got from it is that I'm a child of that generation. And so I grew up with that being like one of the most important aspects of our existence is the civil rights movement. And so seeing what happened last year, I'd never actually seen anything quite like that before. And I was amazed. And I enjoyed the bringing down statues. I enjoyed people getting passionate and finally kind of fighting for, that happened in Ferguson. I was paying attention to that then.
Yeah.
Just the same way. In fact, I've done a lot of artwork based on that, but it didn't really kind of, not all parts were in place. And so for me, and I think the same for the rest of the country, so this past year, I'd never seen anything quite like that. So it didn't remind me of anything from my childhood. It was just like, I wondered why it didn't happen sooner for my generation, in a sense. If my generation grew up with that, why didn't we kind of revisit that sort of thing 20 years ago? That was the thing that I got out of it. So it was reinvented. It was like this whole movement that was reinvented, basically. It wasn't passed down necessarily from a previous generation. It was just everybody had to kind of reinvent this movement. That's my take on it.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of sort of this, like the way Gen Zs like look at the things of the 90s, like the style, the music, the aesthetic, where like Gen Z feels like they've sort of remixed it and taken it on in a way, and they sort of made it their own. But it's very reminiscent, or it's sort of a continuation of like the stuff that we saw like in the 90s sort of coming up. And so it's, where it sort of skipped a generation and sort of the generation after that sort of embodied it. It reminds me about that a little bit. I say that just because my girlfriend and I were just sort of laughing at some TikToks of, Gen Zs doing Gen Z stuff. And, but it really gave me that sort of feel, of just like the conversations I would have with my parents and the frustration I would have of why they were sort of, passive in many ways when things sort of came to be. And like,
I have a theory about that. I ran it by my mom. She disagreed. She's like 73, so what does she know, right? So no, she was there for a lot of it. But, that movement in the 60s, what happened in the 70s, now I remember the 70s really well. And to me, that was a very dark time.
Yeah.
Fighting through the 70s as a kid, everybody was a burnout. Everybody was really deep into drug culture. And that's a tricky thing. That's a political thing too. But I'm talking about like addicted in a way that you were dropped out of society. It was like a really pervasive thing.
Yeah.
And so what you have to wonder is like how convenient for certain powers to be that society all of a sudden became passive due to drug culture, or drug usage.
Yeah.
Was that orchestrated? Was that just something that happened? My mom thinks, people just enjoy drugs. And I'm like, well, it seems very convenient after such a, turbulent time when people finally started standing up for their rights that all of a sudden everybody zoned out on drugs. I mean, so, I would be on the lookout for that, is people can't go to sleep after this movement. They got to stay awake.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the interesting things that came out of it was sort of like this whole push. I mean, obviously like the Black Panthers and stuff like that happened. But then there was this sort of push in the arts and entertainment, blaxploitation, like that whole era sort of came and it it came, like it was there,
Yeah.
and it was in many ways, it was a very direct extension from, a lot of the stuff that was happening in the 60s.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that like I just know I grew up on, right? Just sort of like that whole era and like what it meant, and just like how powerful that was, for just representation, and being able to express these ideas without being thrown in jail and getting attacked for them, you know? And so I thought, like that's one of the things that's like has always stuck with me. And that's one of the things that like has really been encouraging, uh, you know, seeing other like creators like you that are like making these, work and providing these things available, and then being able to sort of like build on that and then continue that sort of movement, right? Because it's like now we're seeing videos, we're seeing, stuff on Netflix, we're seeing creative work that's coming from these things that you can't cancel that stuff, right? You can't block it or censor it once it's out there,
Right.
and so in many ways it's like this is a way to sort of decentralize all the much like the movement is sort of decentralized now. This is a way to decentralize those ideas to where they just exist,
Yeah.
and you can't burn a book of it and just wipe it away now. And so I'm just really curious to see like what things look like, like the end of this year, like the next 5-10 years, because
Yeah.
like history shows that like, yeah, there's that looming sort of reality that has happened. And it's just a matter of like, will this generation move forward, like be able to resist those possibilities, and I just instantly think of the term Afrofuturism, where like, in an Afrofuturistic society, like these events become more equitable over time. Life becomes more equitable over time. Um, and maybe we will see something like that.
Yeah. One thing I should apologize about my mom's age, 73. I didn't mean to disparage her for that. She's
Oh
doing.
yeah, hey,
I was
I
just bashing my mom just for being how you get into arguments with your parents about things. It never ends, by the way.
yeah, that's what I'm starting to see. Like,
Yeah.
I just turned 30, and the same sort of back and forth that me and my parents have
Yeah.
when I was like in high school. The only thing they can't do is ground me. Like they can't say, "Hey, you're not getting lunch money today." Like,
Right. Yeah, it never ends. And then when you have your kids, you try to be a little more aware of that. You try, and it's probably still the same for them, of course.
yeah,
But the best you could do is to try to back off a little bit and let them do their thing. Um, so yeah, but it does. You're right. Both ways, it does. It doesn't really end either way. So, which is fine. That's fine. They're the people that knew you back when.
yeah.
Uh, so
Knew you before you knew yourself.
yeah, right.
Yeah, it's yeah, gotta love them, gotta love them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I guess one really like last question that I have is like what got you into like doing the work that you're doing? Like what was that seed that really sparked it?
The easiest answer for that would be my uncle was an artist when I was a kid, so I wanted to be an artist from the start. So that was always there, and I had the facility for it. I could draw. But when I was 15 in my hometown, there was this mask maker, and he had started a business. And I contacted him. I started working for him. And so all through high school, I worked for him. He's still in business. His masks are highly collected. He's, I think, the oldest mask maker continuously in business. I mean, that business has been around since 1979. So, over 40 years. It's called Death Studios. Death Studios. So you could look it up. But yeah, so that was where the sculpting and sculpting heads started, was at that place, basically. And doing everything old school way. He still does everything old school way. Even though he was the one who told me about ZBrush. First time I'd ever heard of ZBrush was through him. But he still does everything the old school way. So does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think this, like what you said about that, really shows the importance of like the program that I'm working with Dan for, where, in order for kids to sort of get into this stuff, one, you sort of have to have an anchor. You have to have a reference point that's relevant to you, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not like they just stumble upon it on the internet and then they just spend hours and hours and hours doing it. Like, it's like there's actually, there's a personal reason for why each one of the kids are going to, dive into work like this. And, I think that's, if anything, I think that's even more powerful than, what they actually do, is just like how they actually get to it,
I agree. Yeah.
Like it's definitely, encouraging to hear, because we know how it gets when, trying to connect with kids and trying to, tap in with people, and, if it's just not what they're interested in, it's not what they're interested in.
Oh man, that is so true. That's so true. I have 3 kids. Only one of them wanted to be a sculptor. And then people were like, yeah, of course he's great. He's your kid, he's a sculptor like you. And I'm like, that's not the way it works. I mean, yeah, he was born with a certain ability, but you have to want to do it.
Yeah.
Even if the encouragement is there, a person has to want to do that thing. And so you try to find that right thing for everybody, best you could do is put it out there. And if you might get a few people, and that's good enough,
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So yeah. Hey, it's definitely an honor to just be able to speak to you, and just because I've been following your work for a little bit, and I'm a big XXX Tentacion fan, so I knew about like that sculpture. And so, because I remember going to the website and seeing it, and then it wasn't until recently that I actually connected the two, that like, you did the bust and stuff for George Floyd.
Actually, Rodman did that one too.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, that was his. Yeah.
Oh man, hey, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree.
Yeah.
Because it's just being able to just be aware of that stuff, because just what I've learned is just the ability to have representation within those sorts of mediums. Just having a 3D model of a Black person is really, really hard to find. Like, it's typically you'll just find a base 3D model, and then they'll just change the shade, the skin shader for it. And so to be able to actually like have existing like models that like represent Black people in an authentic way is just, it seems like it's just like a low-hanging fruit asinine problem, but like it's a very real problem, like that. It just not a lot of stuff out there. And so
and that's why you can understand why a lot of my work is devoted to sculpting African Americans, because I'm a traditional portrait sculptor, and so what's needed in my time period, we don't need any more white male politician busts. We don't need that. And so you want your work to be relevant to the time that you live in. And so before the riots, or not the riots, but the protests, the turmoil last year, there was questions about why we're doing this kind of work, because we had been doing it before. And then so when the statues were coming down, I think that answered the question. People were like, "Oh, okay, I think I get it now." So it's not without question. People question why we do this all the time, and it's like, obviously it depends on the time, the landscape, the what's going on, that you could find the answer for it or not find the answer for it. But I think that people actually revolting and taking down the statues, I found that to be a very helpful thing,
Yeah. One less thing you have to explain.
Yeah, I guess that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, it's and then I think on the flip side of that, people will be surprised when you're able to produce something so quickly in response to it.
That's true.
Like that's the other thing that I found, is that people were like, "Oh man, how are you able to like do that so fast?" It was like, I've been working on this thing for like a couple of years. It just so happens that like, it's relevant now, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I guess, the comments, one of the other things about comments on Sketchfab is I do appreciate people reaching out and saying nice things, but I don't need it. As an artist, when we work alone, we live in this fantasy land. And so when you get the comments, there's a certain dose of reality that comes with that. Whereas it bursts that fantasy bubble. So you make a work of art, every work of art that you nurture and put out into the world, you think thousands of people are going to appreciate it, and that's not a bad place to live, because you do have to kind of kid yourself about things,
Yeah.
And so when you get the comments on there, they're appreciated, but at the same time, not necessary, because already in my head, I'm putting stuff out there that I know is going to reach certain people. Yeah. And so, that's, I think, when it comes down to it, you can't worry about what the rest of the world says. You just got to know what you're doing is going to be important to somebody, because it's hard being an artist. You know that it's hard. You have to be self-motivated.
Yes. Do you like, even if you get an ounce of success, like you still have to be motivated to like continue it.
Absolutely.
Because it's you get to a certain level of comfort. And then you'd be like, okay, like the things that I was doing before to get to this point, I really don't have to do those now or whatever. Like, and so like the starving artist part, I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that. But the desire to sort of innovate and continue to learn, that's one of the things that like I'm finding that I have a lot more appreciation for now.
Yeah.
Just sort of being a student of the game, if you were to say, right? And then just being able to just challenge yourself as sort of processes change or technology changes. It's, new materials come out, and now it's a matter of like, how do you use those materials, right? Like, I just got a die cutter. How can I implement that into my art practice? And what can I create with that incorporates art and technology? It's very fortunate to, my ancestors will be proud.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But hey, it was an honor to chat. Truly appreciate the time. Definitely insightful. And I'm definitely going to show this recording to my students, because I think there's a lot of stuff that they will really appreciate from what you said. Like,
okay.
It's I think you dropped some gems that like I definitely couldn't say better.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And So the Wall Street Journal reached out to me, right? So like this is what like
Nice.
set this whole thing off, right? So the Wall Street
Congratulations.
Journal reached out to me, I think earlier in January, and so we were in talks to possibly do something for the Future of Everything conference or Future of Everything festival, which is like the festival that they have every like summer time, and so they confirmed me for the festival to like do a speaking thing, and with it I that was one of the things that encouraged me to sort of like continue building on that project, and so I may circle back with you on a few things because it's focused around sort of accessibility with tools and sort of being that spark, and
Yeah.
and utilizing sort of just the stuff that's available on the internet, um, to sort of explore those ideas and essentially express yourself in a particular using technology in a variety of ways. And so yeah, I definitely want to tap in with you because I'm really curious about the sculpt. Was it you said sculpt geo?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sculpture.
like I definitely want to circle back with you on some things, particularly that because I want to be able to like provide just like if you have a computer and an idea, like you could do all this,
Right.
type of thing, and I think that would be really really powerful being on the Wall Street Journal platform to just be able to just like pull that off. Um, yeah, yeah. So I'm definitely going to circle back with you on that.
Yeah. Anytime. Anytime.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, and I will definitely let Dan know that I chatted with you because he'll be
All
like,
right.
oh yeah,
Yeah. That'd
yep,
be great.
yep. But yep, truly appreciate the time and everything, and be safe, enjoy the California weather. Get some sunshine for me because it's about to rain out here.
All right. I will. Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Oh yeah, have a good one.
You too. Bye.